we are joined by director Marjane Satrapi, producer Paul Webster, and the two stars of the film, Rosamund Pike and Sam Riley. Welcome all.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hello. Hope you're all well and wherever you all are in the world. Let's start kind of from the beginning, but not quite from the beginning, from Paul's point of view, but maybe starting with you, Marjane, in terms of going from Persepolis and animation to a live action, kind of making that journey in the first place. That's something that always your plan, kind of moving on from animation to live action.
Really, to say it was planned, no, because I mean, it was even not planned that I would become a film director. I was a cartoonist. It was by coincidence that, I started making films and then I loved it. And the problem of animation, it is as marvelous it is extremely long, extremely long, and you have to be very patient. And I'm not very patient, I'm extremely impatient. So it's very good for a marathon runner, but I'm a 100-meter runner. So animation is really nice, but to me it's very boring. So live action, it has something on the energy, you have, once you're shooting. And also, the fact that I don't have the control of everything. When it's an animated film, I basically decide over everything. And when you work with great actors like Rosamund and Sam, it's because they bring something that I do not have. They become these characters, as Rosamund became Marie and Sam became Pierre. They were there. I think them intellectually. They really became these people. So it is also to use the talent of the actors and to abuse of their talent to make the best film possible. So it's something much more exciting about live action.
I think kind of you mentioned the word patience, and Paul, perhaps I think that we'll come to you next. It seems like you've had a lot of patience kind of from the first time you read the graphic novel by Lauren Redniss, who got kind of the basis of where the genesis of the film comes from, to it coming into fruition. It's been a number of years. Can you talk about a little bit about just when you first picked up that graphic novel and what it was that made you think this is the film?
Yeah, it's been about 7 years. So from start to finish for me. When I read the Lauren's book, I was immediately struck by the beauty of it and the way she infused poetry into the lives of these scientists, so that felt new. Pragmatically, I knew Marie Curie was extremely well known. So there was, in today's modern parlance, pre-branded awareness going on. I wanted to tell a story about women. And I was totally drawn to the fact that, she was a woman working in a man's world who brooked no compromise, just did exactly what she wanted to do and achieved it. So it was a great experience developing the script with Jack Thorne and stuff, but it really only came alive once we got first Marjane and then Rosamund, then Sam attached to the film. Then, as usual, the director and the actors make a film. You can dress everything up, but without them, no movie.
Rosamund, and it's Paul just mentioned kind of we're all aware of Marie Curie, but I think I'd heard of her. I knew kind of her achievements and the Nobel Prizes, but I didn't really know her, I don't think, as a person at all until I saw the film. And as someone that's kind of perhaps played roles that, based on real people before, what was that like for you in terms of bringing Marie Curie to life? Did you have any context or anything to draw from in the first instance?
No, I think when you start delving into the life of Marie Curie, you think, my goodness, she's impacted all of our lives, and yet we have very little idea who she is. Yeah. All of the things that have sort of both energized the modern world and terrified it, from radiotherapy for cancer treatment to the atomic bomb, those sort of polarized scientific I wouldn't say wonders, but dramas, I suppose, stem from the work of Marie Curie. And I think it was just a joy to dive into her life and to find what a formidable, uncompromising, brilliant, funny, passionate woman this was, and she does deserve treatment in film, because it's this sort of incredible story of scientific pursuit, love, and ultimately death, and all intertwined around the same subject, which is radioactivity. And I think, the film is called Radioactive, not Marie Curie. It is a biography of radioactivity, and that is what I think makes it cool, and it stood apart amongst other scripts. Funny enough, I was reading another script and considering playing another female scientist. And then this script came along and just eclipsed that, because of the kind of mad postmodern dance it took us through, science, love, Paris, modernity, all of it really.
It does, you're right, it does take you through a real dance, and it's not Marjane in typical terms, like a typical biopic that you see. It kind of touches on modernity, it touches on the impact of kind of what Pierre and Marie's discovery will have on the world. How did you approach that as a director?
It's basically lots of studies, because Marie Curie, in the mind of everyone, is a Victorian woman because it's the end of 19th century. But in reality, most of her life is exactly at the time that you have the change of the world. Everything that today we use in the world, that from telephone to listening to the music, planes, whatever we are using today, they were invented exactly at the moment that she and Pierre met and they discovered the radioactivity. So it was very important, just to first of all show that, this is not this Victorian figure of the woman, with the violin, etc., etc. So this is one of the reasons that when we were talking about the music of the film, my first talk with the musician, it was like, I would really like to have some electronical music, because electronic music appeared in 1920 and not by some German weird people in the 60s. It's just long before that. So, like using that as underlining the modernity of the time, but also not compromising with this figure, and not trying to sell again this woman who is all charm and nice and passion and love, and she's just the muse of Pierre Curie. She's a genius, and as a genius she has also the downside of the genius. The geniuses, they're not very comfortable people, because they have other stuff to care about, rather than, does my neighbor like me, or, does Marjane like me? They don't care because they're focused. So, and it was really to show how she was. And the way I really went to it, it was, of course, most of the things they were in the script of Jack Thorne, but then you have to understand who this woman is, and reading biography is not enough, because everybody who writes a biography is subject to the biography which she or he writes. So it was reading all her correspondences, her diary, her letters, everything she herself wrote. And by the word that one person choose, by the way they compose their sentence, by the way they talk, that is when you know who she was. So I had a very clear idea who she was. And Rosamund, she read exactly the same things. And Sam exactly read the same thing. And what was incredible was that the three of us, we had the same idea about the character. And that is when different people read the same material and come to the same conclusion, then you have the feeling that you have touched a little bit of some truth. So that was the way we worked.
You've kind of talked about modernity, and then Sam, I wanted to come to you on that notion of modernity and the relationship between Pierre and Marie. It was, modern for then, and even I might go so far as saying kind of modern for now, kind of his uniqueness in his confidence as a man, but understanding who the genius was in the relationship to an extent. What were you excited to explore in Pierre's character?
Well, I think you're right with the word confidence, but I think one of the fascinating things about them as a pair was I don't think it was discussed. I don't think like a couple might today think, we're doing this equally. Isn't that amazing? We're a man and a woman. I think it was something that went without saying between the two of them. I don't know where that sort of confidence comes from. I think he had a very humanist, is that right, Marjane? Maybe the parental upbringing was quite unusual. He didn't excel academically as a small child, and he wasn't even in school until he was quite more mature, and his mother and father were very much together and a very loving couple. And he'd learned while studying with his brother, they also achieved several important things that are still used today. The art of collaboration. And I think he saw, not only did they fall in love with one another, but I think he saw how brilliant Marie was, and that they each complemented each other. What the other maybe lacked, the other had. Yeah. And with the equipment that he'd been able to develop was exactly the equipment that Marie needed for her studies. And I didn't know very much about either of them, I'm ashamed to say. It wasn't really studied. And I think Pierre's history was a strange one. At first, I think he had a metro station named after him, and then was sort of sidelined for Marie's fame in that sense. And I think the daughter of, or the granddaughter rather, Marie, wanted to readdress that in the film, that they achieved these things together. Did I answer the question? I was sort of went off.
No, perfectly. Thank you. Also, I wanted to pick up, Rosamund, was something that Marjane said in terms of obviously research and all three of you being on the same page with who these characters are and what their essence was. I think I might have read this or heard this kind of, that you came across some photographs of Marie Curie, and that really kind of gave you an insight into who she might have been as a person.
Yeah, well, you know, I'd just come from playing Mary Colvin in The Private War, and she was, you know, she's a much more recent figure, and so there's plenty of news footage where I could not only see what she looked like, but I could see how she spoke, how she moved, and then suddenly, I'm sorry, it seems to be something buzzing, which I thought I turned off. I do apologise. So I felt a bit at sea at first, because I thought, well, where do I go? On one level, it's liberating, but, you know, you feel that the clue to this person must be in there. So I started to sort of pore over these still images and will them to come to life. And one thing you can see as you look at all of them is that she's always, if she is standing still, she's got this sort of expression of impatience on her face, like she'd really rather not be stopping for this business of having her photograph taken. And I thought it started to amuse me because it started to crop up again and again in all these photos. You could imagine the sort of poor photographer, you know, faced with this formidable woman who was really sort of far too busy and didn't really give him the time of day. But it gave me a clue as to sort of how to keep her in motion and keep her driving forwards. And whatever was on her mind, she was always sort of several steps ahead. And, you know, it's true in those famous photographs of the things like the Solvay conference in Norway, where all the preeminent scientists of the day are assembled and they're all waiting rather pompously for their photograph. And Marie is not only, she's the only woman, but she's also the only one who's not stopping to pose. She's sort of chatting to this poor guy on her right, who's kind of conflicted as to sort of whether he poses for his sort of big moment or whether he's polite to this scientist on his left. So you should have a look at that photo. It is quite funny. But again, you know, to Marjane's point, it's true. You know, you can, if I had one idea about how to play Marie, and then whoever I was playing opposite as Pierre had a different idea of that relationship, I would have had to have changed the way I played Marie. You can't create a character in isolation. So the way my instinct of how to play Marie is dependent on Sam's Pierre understanding and finding that Marie charming and appealing. And, you know, if he had not really warmed to that version, I would have had to have changed the version, because the most important thing is he warms to her. So I would have had to have modified if that hadn't really, you know, held any charm for him. Do you see what I mean? So, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a perfect balance. It's like, you know, it is obviously a film about them and their discovery and the kind of great contribution they've made to science, but it is essentially also a love story at the same time, and kind of knowing and understanding how you bring out the best in each other. Marjane, in terms of working with Sam and Rosamund, how did you build a relationship between them?
Well, you know, so now I'm going to be self-indulgent. So when I work with actors, they become my children in a way. I have the feeling that I'm their mother, and with all your children, you cannot behave in the same way. One of them you have to be more careful, the other one you have to make a joke with him. It's like that. So it really depends on the character. And Rosamund and Sam, they're very different people, so you have to deal with them in a different way. But the most important is that I had two extremely talented, extremely smart, extremely devoted children, both of them, that wanted to give the best of themselves. So in terms of working, I don't like too much to repeat the same scene, because I think by too many repetition, you create a kind of mechanism that getting rid of this mechanism afterwards becomes very, very difficult, because you have played it so many times that it works in that way. The most important is that we talk, we read 1 time, 2 times, we have discussion, we all agree what we want to do. And then once we start shooting, the most important for me is that they can also explore what they want to explore. Because again, I think of the character as something that is abstract, is intellectual. I do understand, but I'm not the character. When Rosamund, she plays Marie, she does not play Marie, she is Marie. When Sam plays Pierre, he is Pierre. So these are things that they know, instinctively they know. And I always let them, if Rosamund wanted to change 1 sentence and she wanted to change lots of sentences, she just did, because it must be the way she feels that she's comfortable. If the things she does not feel it's right, or Sam does not feel it's right, then it's not right. So then we give it a try. So it's more a question of, we all have to go into the same direction, but it's not so much, like move to the left, move to the right, go up, go down. I mean, if I want to do this kind of stuff, then I make an animated film, and I did it. So the most important is to use their talent. And then I have to say, I had 2 of the best actors, so it was very easy.
I'm just going to remind the audience at home to ask questions, because we will run out of time at some point, and then you will kick yourself for not getting that across. Paul, I wanted to talk to you about kind of the scope of the film, and through different ages, the way it looks is really impressive. But I imagine there was some sort of budget attached to that, but not the budget that you get perhaps with like a Marvel film, but a budget all the same. How did you work within that, and kind of what were the implications, kind of getting the film that this team all wanted to get made, but with what you had to offer?
Interesting question. The script was ambitious, and we skip around the 20th century various places, and achieving all of that within the scope of our budget was challenging. But first thing you do is you hire a good production designer, and we had a wonderful one in Michael Carlin, who's also very familiar with working in Budapest, because we didn't shoot in Paris at all, not 1 frame. We shot everything apart from the desert scenes in Budapest and just outside Budapest in Hungary. It's always a balancing act. As a producer, you guesstimate what the film is going to cost, and then you go out in the marketplace and test, see what the response is to the material. And as ever, it's a kind of, you're on the scales. On the one hand, you've got the film, the artistic vision, which is got to be preserved as much as possible. On the other, you've got to make it, you can't, the Marvel budget's off a Marvel film, so this has to be made for less. But it was Studio Canal really supported us and gave us decent money, so I don't think we ever hurt. We did okay, and with the help of our, it's always about the crew. Everything starts with the director. But it's always about the crew, and Michael Carlin, our production designer, and Anthony Dodd-Mantle, who shot it, are kind of geniuses. So they're missing at this Q&A, but I think they belong here because they really, really contributed enormously to the process.
I'm going to change tack completely now, and Rosamund, come to you, kind of just in terms of looking at playing a woman that perhaps, I don't like words such as prickly or unlikable, because we can all be those things at kind of at any moment. I'm those things for the first 3 hours of every day, but it's kind of so refreshing to see a woman allowed to be a woman in all different senses of the word, and kind of, but still kind of retain individuality at the same time. Was this kind of, I know obviously you've been fortunate to kind of have some really great roles where you've been given scope to do that before as well, but what was it particularly about this script and that character that you felt kind of could push that, maybe even those boundaries even a bit further?
Actually thinking about this before we did this Q&A tonight, and I thought, I was thinking about actors and how they go about, playing roles, and I was thinking, I could have opted for a way of playing her that served me, Rosamund, better. I could have chosen to be very likable and be very warm and lovely, and I could have served myself. Do you know what I mean? It's good. I could have chosen to give a performance, obviously with sort of Marjane's blessing, which she wouldn't have given, let me add. But if I'd wanted to, use Marie Curie as a vehicle for myself. Do you see what I mean? I could have taken her genius and just made her a sort of easily likable, everybody get behind Marie Curie. What a wonderful, easy, fantastic woman. I want her to be my best friend. Well, I could have done that, but it wouldn't have interested me at all, because I think she wouldn't have been Marie Curie. She might have been the woman you'd fall in love with, or your next door neighbor, or the mum at the school gates you want to be like, I don't know, but she wouldn't be Marie Curie. And so I chose the more difficult route, which is, can I make someone who's as forthright, as obstinate, as stubborn, as sometimes rude, as passionate as I believe her to be, and get away with leading this movie? It's an interesting conundrum. I believe yes, because I follow people like that. And for a start, we've always seen men in these roles who, because they're a genius, they're given endless rope to behave as badly as they want, to be as womanizing as they want, to drink, to mess around, to be appalling, to let people down, and they're always given endless slack because they're a genius. And I don't think the same kind of slack has ever been afforded a woman. And Marie Curie doesn't do any of that. Well, she was obviously, scandal followed her later in life, and it was sort of, very surprising, really, seeing as, she got all the flack for that affair she had with Langevin, much more than he did, and he was the married man. And plus, she'd been the kind of complete toast of the town, and then just because she'd been embraced completely by French culture, French society, and then France was on the brink of war. Suddenly, a foreigner who was potentially breaking up the nuclear French family was all of a sudden a threat. And once again, she was the outsider, the foreigner, the person who was bringing down the status quo. So she was met with double standards her whole life. And I think, to her credit, she didn't let it bother her. And she'd made that decision not to let it bother her way before the thing came that could hurt her. She had said it wasn't going to bother her when they were covering her and showering her with accolades. And I believe in this industry too. It's the only thing you can do, is you say, I'm just, I'm going to tread my path. I'm going to be true to myself. I'm not going to be swayed by the accolades, because one day they'll be met with, what will follow will be the same people trying to bring you down. So I think she trod a very resolute path, but that makes you less instantly, cuddly, sort of easy to know, easy to like, I suppose. But I found it fun, and she's a woman I would have deeply respected for all those things. So
it's really, that outsider viewpoint it's interesting. It's just really unfortunate that 100 years on, that point of view is even now more is what's my word that I'm looking for? It's relevant, yeah. Relevant, even more so even now. So in a way, maybe Marjane as in a way the outsider of this story, of the storyteller. What was it that you could bring uniquely to the telling of Marie and Pierre?
Well, stories about films about Marie Curie and Pierre Curie has been made, 4 of them. The first of them started in the 40s. And after that, you had films and series, etc., etc. So why tell the story again? Well, you tell the story again only if you have a new point of view. Well, the first new point of view is that Marie is not Pierre Curie's muse. And this is not like the goal of her life is not to get married, even though she loves him. I mean, she's so much in love with him that when you see her picture, I mean, this is a Marie before the death of Pierre, and this is a Marie after the death of Pierre. I mean, when you see the picture, she never smiles after that. She's like, deep inside, something has died forever. So she's sentimental, she is romantic, but she's uncompromising. So this is the first thing that is modern. Then the second thing is that you cannot talk about Marie and Pierre, and you cannot talk about her without talking about her science, what she has discovered. Because her discovery changed completely the face of the world. After the 20th century becomes the 20th century because of this discovery of radioactivity. And once you talk about radioactivity, you cannot talk about the aftermath of radioactivity because it has changed the world. And from the cure of the cancer, that was the first thing that they thought about, until the nuclear bomb. What happened in Chernobyl, and even geopolitically today, the people that they have the nuclear weapon, they are not playing in the same court as the one that they don't have it. I mean, the whole world has changed completely. So you have to talk about all of that. And this way you have a complete story. So this is what is, I think, modern in this film. And so Rosamund said at the beginning, is a biography also of radioactivity. It's not just Marie Curie, the great woman. It's Marie Curie and radioactivity and the love story. And the fact that she does not look for being likable, because we women, we are not always likable because we are human beings. I mean, this idea of this eternal woman who is so soft and sweet and all of that is an idea that has been created, embraced a lot by the women themselves, because, it gives them some kind of style, I would guess. But in reality, do you know any single woman who is really kind all the time? I don't know any of. I have not seen one like that my whole life. Women, they're like men. I mean, they're nasty ones, they're unlikable ones, they're very likable ones. I mean, they're just human beings with extra boobs. So, this is it. So if we go from there, then you see it's not such a huge difference. And Rosamund is right. I mean, she's a genius, and therefore. And, also, I was making a film about somebody who has existed. We have not made a story about MC, is Marie Curie. She's an actual person. I have to be faithful to her spirit. Of course, we need to cheat a little bit with the story, to make all round and beautiful, and make it exciting, etc. We have to invent things. But there is something we cannot be not faithful to, is the spirit of a first person. We need to stay faithful. And fortunately, Rosamund, me, Sam, Paul, all of us, we agreed about that. And my fortune in this story was also because Paul Webster was my producer. I mean, it happens very rarely that you have a producer for who the artistic point of view and, my point of view as a director is so important. I mean, without his full support until the end of the film, it would have been impossible to do that. So, I mean, all of that is also due it is very much related to have a producer who loves the cinema more than the money. And this is the case of Mr. Webster.
Yeah.
I'm going to give the audience at home their kind of 5-minute warning, but we have had a question come in from Paul Wooding. It's a question for Rosamund and Sam. How do you make yourself feel at home in a period in society that isn't your own?
Do you want to go, Rosamund?
There you go.
All right. Well, we were lucky that we had such wonderful costumes. Consolata made these incredible costumes that I think Rosamund and I used a similar technique without getting pompous, is we stared at these pictures of Pierre and Marie until we sort of felt we'd absorbed them to some extent. And the costumes very much made that that come alive. I listen to the music of the era often when I'm in my trailer or something, which helps get me in that sort of spirit. But the sets were incredible, and the makeup as well. You know, I'd need about 2 years notice to grow a beard like that. So it was lucky that I left the trailer every morning really not resembling myself whatsoever, and that had a magical effect. And I think that somehow there was something about the two characters which is timeless, and I think that we connected somehow, Rosamund and I, in a similar way, that it felt very present. It didn't feel not dated, but it didn't feel like an old story when we were playing it. It felt like something very contemporary, very immediate. One felt that on set with this equipment and everything. It was you felt the excitement that they must have felt at that time, coming up with something as incredible as that. I think it's really fascinating, Rosamund, isn't it, that this couple from Pfizer as well, have you read about them, who've come out with the vaccine?
Are they a couple?
Yeah.
I've read
refugees who went to West Berlin, who were one of the main champions of this, of the Pfizer one. And they said that, I read an interview where on their wedding day, they went and did the vows and then went straight back to the lab.
Oh my gosh.
And it made me,
I will do
that.
It
really reminded me of them, this sort of shared passion of work and of love and everything, and refugees, like she wasn't a refugee, but from Poland moving to Spain. Yeah.
But that's the thing, you know, that time frames change, but human passions and desires and pursuits, they remain pretty much the same. And I think when you're doing a period movie, if you put the time frame first, so you're playing the period, not playing the emotion, then you've sort of missed a step, really.
Yeah.
You know, Paul Webster and I met when he produced Pride and Prejudice, and you know, I always feel so proud of our film because, you know, that was a version of Austen that prioritized, you know, Austen for me is all about, you know, young women having huge feelings for the first time that remain universal, and she documents so perfectly what it feels like to experience these big things for the first time, and our film, I think, you know, prioritize that and over sort of the dresses. I mean, the details were all perfect, but we were playing the feelings and left it to everybody else to sort of set the scene beautifully. And I think the same about Marie and Pierre, you know, that there are certain things that from experience, you know, Sam and I have probably both done period films before, and there are certain mechanics, like when you're in a dress, which I've learned years ago, and, you know, it just becomes second nature that you have to kick these big skirts out of the way. You have to move around them and you kick and then you move. But that's sort of second nature now, because I've, you know, had to deal with big dresses on stage, but all those things you do have to learn, and you have to feel that they're clothes, not costumes. And you rely, as you say, on a costume designer for that. I think, you know, when that scene, you know, I'm thinking of the scene where I sort of finally dusted off the lab after Pierre had died and she didn't touch it for a while. I thought, well, is this any different from any woman doing any cleaning ever? You know, she's just doing what you do. She's wiping down the surfaces and swilling out the bottles and getting rid of the shit like anybody would now. So, and I think, you know, maybe science has changed, and I think both of us were quite surprised at how much manual labor was involved with science at that time. You know, the physical grinding of vast quantities of raw substance. You know, they got this pitch blend delivered by the ton and set to work bashing it down into a form that they could use. I mean, it was a lot of sweat and tears went into that. But yeah, so I think it's there's not much really in terms of, even because it's not a film about the etiquette at all, really, is it?
It's about the lack of it and long live the lack of etiquette. I love how kind of how you've said about the emotion coming before the period, because emotion is just so timeless, isn't it? And so if you can't grasp the basis of that, then everything else is lost.
Connective tissue emotion, and that's what drama is, and that's what acting is. It's sharing with other humans what it feels like to be human. I always sort of think it always comes back to that, really.
Sam mentioned the costume designer and hair and makeup designer, so I'm just going to give them a name check. It's Consolata Boyle, who was the costume designer, and Denise Cum is the hair and makeup designer. And then Marjane, I want to come to you for the last word on the film. Kind of maybe this is where we started at the beginning, and I don't know if anything has changed in the last 30 minutes, but kind of the takeaway from it, the kind of takeaway for an audience that's watching this. What was the essence of what you wanted to communicate, and what do you hope for audiences to take away from after they've watched the film?
Just the value of love, of passion, and I think the attraction of intelligence. I think nothing is more attractive. Nothing is more. It creates desire. The thing that creates most desire in people is the intelligence of the other one. This is the celebration of intelligence. Is a celebration of, love, compassion, passion. And the celebration of science. That is what we need, because this is what's also what we wanted to say with this film. You have people, they discover things, and this is the human nature who wants to discover the secret of the nature. Science is about that. So nothing is more human basically than the scientific research. How do we discover the secret of the nature? So if we can just give that to people, I think is quite good. And also, a good 1.5 hours where they can enjoy watching a film and be brought in another time and, just dive into a story that is offering people a little bit more than 1.5 hours of dream. Is not a lot, but still is that.
Well, I don't know. The scientific research has never been as important as it is right now in the world that we're living in. Otherwise, we would have been doing this sitting on a nice stage somewhere, being able to see all the people in the audience. So everyone that's watched us has managed to watch the film on our BAFTA View portal. If you've got friends at home that haven't had a chance to see it, I believe it is available in the UK on Amazon. I want to thank Marjane, Rosamund, Sam and Paul for this wonderful film, and thank you for joining me this evening.
Thank you
for having us. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.